My name is Trevor Cooper, and I played. He was called the Drunk in the first series. I believe the Christmas episode of the first series of London's Burning. If you looked, it's not actually. My first ever job was on the BBC Radio Rep, and it must have been. I don't remember it at all. I looked at the cast. I thought I don't remember doing this, and I was on the Radio Rep for 6 months from like late 1979 through to sort of 1980. And it must have been something I did then. You're going to have to, there's lots of things I've forgotten because we're now talking, 45 years ago. But that what I was a lawyer to start with years ago. I did a degree in law. I did a master's in law. And I lectured in law at South Bank Polytechnic for a couple of years. But by then I'd done quite a lot of drama at university and stuff. And I thought, I want to give that a chance. I really want to sort of try that, even if it doesn't work out. And then I'll go back. At least I've now got a basis in teaching I can go back to. And I went to drama school when I was 25, which is relatively late. At a place called the Drama Studio in Ealing, and I did a 1-year course. And in the course of that, I entered this competition called the Carlton Hobbs Award, which was for radio drama. And we did very well. Our drama school, we came first, second, and third in the men's section, and I was first. And so which was a competition that covered all the drama schools in the country. And the prize was a 6-month contract at the BBC Radio Rep and an equity card, which in those days was crucial. You couldn't work without one. Doesn't matter now because the unions have been so weakened since sort of the lovely Margaret Thatcher's time. But in those days, an equity card was crucial. And I got an equity card because I got this job. So it was a brilliant start. I mean, when I got the news, it was like, oh my God, I'm off, I can start. And I've never looked back, really. So I did 6 months on the radio, my first job, and including that, the haunted, whatever it was. And then, branched out into telly and film and everything else, theatre. I can't remember the exact details. I honestly can't. I don't think it was like a straight offer over the phone, because I do remember meeting Les Blair. And my agent at the time had said, look, there's this small part in this, which was then a new series, London's Burning. It's very small. Would you be interested? And I think my feeling was that had it not been Les Blair, I wouldn't have been interested. And I'd seen quite a lot of Les Blair's work on things. I think he did Law and Order, did things like that. And the thing about Les Blair, I knew that he was heavily into things like sort of naturalism and improv. And I thought, well, I really, I'd like to work for him. So I met him and we got on well. And I don't remember it much apart from vaguely what he looked like, and then I'd heard I got the job, so sort of that was that. He'd sort of said, I think the written lines for the Drunk there weren't very many. Basically, it was that gag. There's one thing I've always wanted to say. Where's the fire? That was the only lines I remember written. And I think that he'd said, be ready to sort of say some other stuff, and so there was quite a lot of improv in it. Well, funnily enough, I don't really drink, and I've never been a big drinker, so I had to sort of, I've been drunk a few times in my life, but not many. I just, you just have to, it's one of those things you sort of pick up. I think, if I see someone who's drunk and wheeling around, then you sort of, an actor studies people like that. You have a look and you see what is it that makes them do what they do. And there was one thing I remember once seeing a very drunk man in the street trying to pick himself up, having fallen over. And he got up like a baby gets up, you know, like with the sort of his legs and then coming up like this. And it was things like that. I mean, can't remember whether I used that or not, but it, you know, I've had to be drunk a few times, and you've got to, the whole thing about being drunk is obviously any drunk around is trying to make out that he's sober. So that's the main thing you have to do. You can't say, all right, I'm going to play drunk. You have to get into your head, I'm being absolutely rational and sober, and you know, but you're not very good at it. That's what it is. I was only on the set for a day. That day we shot the scene, you know, in one day. I was employed for one day, and my scene was at the end of the day. I know, because it was sort of getting towards evening. We were somewhere in, I think, East London-ish. Although I can't really remember. I was sitting around on set for a long time. And then some of that towards the end, I was sitting, you know, with the rest of the cast waiting to sort of go. I knew a couple of people in the cast. I knew Richard Walsh, who was Sick Note. We'd worked in theatre before. And Mark Arden, I knew. We'd worked in review and things like that before. And so, you know, I was just chatting away as actors do to the other people who were in it. I didn't know, I mean, the series, I think it hadn't come out yet, I don't think, when we filmed it, because it was the last one of that series. I don't think they'd started, or maybe they had, I don't know. But and you know, I remember at the time, Les giving me a fairly free rein. You know, there was sort of build-ups. I was seen standing at one thing, weaving about, and then at a sort of bus stop, weaving around, and then I come over and they spot me coming over towards them, I think. And then we sort of launched into the bits of dialogue, you know. I don't remember much about it. It was a fun day, and it seemed to go down well. He seemed to be pleased with it. The irony being that he never employed me again. The whole point about, you know, doing the job was to work for Les Blair, and he never used me again. So maybe my drunk wasn't that good. They were all really friendly and nice. I mean, they all seemed to have had a good time. It seemed to be a very happy set. As I say, my only bit in it was my only actual bit in filming was the bit that you see on the film. But you know, they were all telling anecdotes and cracking gags, and there were nicknames, and you know, there was a lot of that going on that I can remember. I can't remember. I remember sitting in a sort of you know, the coffee and tea area with lots of sandwiches around, and everyone sitting around in a circle waiting for things to happen. And we just sat there, and people were chatting and telling stories and making connections, which is what actors do most of the day. Yeah, that's all really. I do remember being quietly surprised that I don't remember the costume fitting and all that, but presumably, you know, what normally happens is after you've been cast, you get rung up by the costume and makeup. And I think the makeup, as far as I can, you know, I had a phone call and said, look, this is what I look like. And they said, that's fine. Keep it as it is. And I think when I got on set, it was trimmed a bit in that. A wardrobe, they decided they wanted to make me quite reasonably sort of smartly dressed. I mean, so I got a suit on and a coat, I think, a raincoat. So I'm like a sort of guy who works, I don't know, maybe in the city or something. He's just got drunk on a lunch break. I think that was, and I was quite surprised at that. And apparently that came from Les. Les had said he wanted him to be not like one of those drunks who's like, you know, completely let himself go. It's just a bloke who's at work, got drunk. you know, at lunchtime or something. And so that was, I do remember that. And that had come from Les. He wanted a reasonably sort of smart bloke. But so that's where the costume came from. And I can't remember it, but I guess I'd had a fitting probably at, what do you call it? Names go through my brain. At the usual place, except it's a different place. There used to be a place in Camden where we used to go for fittings and things. Probably it was there back in '88. Yeah. And yeah, so that was it really. I don't remember much about that aspect of it really. I don't really. I just, you know, it was because it was like one day 40 years ago, nearly. I don't. I mean, and that's because I'm old and I forget things. All I can remember was that it was a happy little day, and I was quite pleased with what I'd done, and everyone seemed to be pleased. And when it went out, I think it served the purpose that it was in there for. And people have remembered it. I occasionally get people come up and say, "Oh, I always remember," you know, people who see me in other things. I always remember you're drunk in London's Burning, and you know, because it's such a sort of silly gag. Where's the fire, you know, and all that. And I you know, but I'm sorry that it's, you know, age has got the better of me, and I don't remember much about actually the day and if anything went wrong. Or as far as I remember, it all went pretty well, and we got it done in the day, and that was that. Yeah. I do a lot less now than I did. I'm not retired, but it's getting to the point where the business has retired me rather than I've retired the business, if that makes sense. But I still do some audio stuff. I do quite a lot of work for Big Finish. Do you know them? Who do the Doctor Who things. And I was in a series in the mid-'80s called Star Cops, and I played one of the lead characters in that. And that's now one of the Big Finish series. So funnily enough, we did the TV series, which was a flop, incidentally, again, it was in the mid-'80s. I think it was before London's Burning, 86, something. And it was a flop on television. And then 40 years later, Big Finish decided to bring it back. And so the same cast, although a lot older and a bit more wobbly, have now done 4 series of Star Cops for Big Finish. With 3 of the original cast, because the other 3 were dead. Terrible. But yeah, so I do that. I do quite a lot of sort of voiceovers and dubbing and things. That I haven't done much sort of stand-up TV acting. The last job, I had a tiny part in a thing that Noel Fielding did about Dick Turpin. And the big ones the last big jobs I did, really, I did a big theatre job just before COVID, Death of a Salesman in the West End with Wendell Pierce. That was fantastic. This Country, the sitcom, written by my niece and nephew, which did very well and got 4 BAFTAs. And Call the Midwife. I did 3 series of Call the Midwife. So it was great. I had a nice little sort of autumn of my career where I got some really nice work. But I mean, that's now 5 or 6 years ago. You know, I haven't done much in the last 5 or 6 years. My absolute pleasure. I'm sorry I couldn't remember more of it. I wish there'd been a very funny story or something, but if there was, I can't remember it. But you know, so excuse my old age, my senility.